Hey everyone, this is part 2 of my render farm tutorial for Blender series. In this video I'm going to show you some specific Windows settings that we can enable to help us share files between all of our PCs, and then I'll show you how to actually share the files from one of your machines, and then we'll cover some specific rendering settings and a few common settings between all the files that you'll need to know to make this method successful. Okay, now I'm going to be a complete nerd and use this whiteboard to kind of diagram what the server setup will look like. Your internet will come in this way and it'll go to your workstation, which we'll label WS, and that's your main PC that you plan to sit on. But in between there, you've got a modem and a router. In my case, I come off of these and I set up a switch that is not managed. So let's just label that switch with some really nice handwriting. Dumb switches are perfect. So that's what we have here. Anything on this network will be able to talk. So any of these PCs can talk to each other once we set up Windows properly. So we don't need any sort of a direct connection between the workstation and the switch because they're already networked this way. So off of this switch, then we'll have all of our workers. So let's just draw those as new boxes here. So those we'll call R1, R2, R3, R4, and so on. So the benefit of doing it this way is once all of these things are configured, you can sit at your workstation, prepare your frames for rendering, and then send the render job to each one of these using a shared folder on, usually it's stored on one of these PCs. It could be stored on your main machine. It just depends on what hard drives you have set up, but it doesn't matter. It can be anywhere. So you might have another one here, and like in my case I do, called S, where I keep the storage for all of these things. So what I can do is I can share my file to this guy here. So my main file comes down from the workstation to the storage. All of these render machines and the workstation can access this folder, and that is the key, is being able to access your Blender file and all of your textures and anything else you have in your file that you need to render, fluid bakes, whatever. That all has to be in one shared location. Otherwise, this method doesn't work at all. So that's kind of what the network looks like physically. I will walk around here and show you. So here's the switch. One of these lines goes to my router, and I actually have two switches on this wall. So a line goes to a switch, which comes to this Ethernet cable here and goes up and over, and that eventually gets to the router. So the router here has access from outside, that has the internet access, and everything downstream of here, which is everything else in my house, is after this. So the rest of it is basically just dumb switches. Okay, now that we've got our render worker set up with Windows installed, your screen should look like this. Here I'm showing you my Render 1 machine. One of the first things you can change here in Windows, go to the Start menu, go to Settings, and then System. All the way at the bottom left, go to About. And right here, you can rename the computer. So when you click that, a little box comes up, type in whatever you want, and then it'll ask you to restart the computer. So go ahead and do that. This is the name that you will use to remote into this computer later. So write it down and make sure you know which PC goes to which name. So mine, I've already renamed it to Render 1. And then the next thing we need to enable is Remote Desktop App. So that's actually one tab above on the left side here. We're still in System Settings. So we'll click on Remote Desktop. When you start Windows the first time, this will not be enabled. I already have it enabled because I'm remoted into this right now to film this. The quality is much better than filming it with my phone. When you get into this, this will be turned off, so remote desktop will not be enabled. And this top checkbox, which says keep my PC awake for connections when it is plugged in, that will also be unchecked. And you won't be able to enable this top one, but we need it. So what you do is click on the show settings to the right over here. I always set the sleep settings to never. And then on the right side, we want to go to additional power settings. Pull down this drop box for additional plans. Pick the high performance plan. Just make sure that no setting in here is going to try to put the PC to sleep or shut it down. So once you've got the high performance plan selected, you can close out of this. And when you come back into the remote desktop settings, you can now check this box, or it should automatically be checked. So now we'll have the PC will be discoverable on private networks, and the PC will stay awake for connections when it's plugged in. And then you'll want to enable remote desktop connection, which is just this top checkbox here. So what that'll do is it'll allow us to use our workstation computer to remote into each one of these PCs without moving computers around or hauling monitors around, anything like that. Go back to the general settings tab here, and we have to go to network and internet. Go to network and sharing center, and then change advanced sharing settings. So we'll click that. I go through all of these different options, all these different networks. So they have private, guest or public, and all networks. And so basically just turn on all these options. So then you'll hit save changes. And what that does is it lets this PC share files. That is it for network and sharing center. So at this point, obviously, on each worker, make sure you have a matching version of Blender and your GPU drivers are up to date, all that kind of stuff. Probably make sure you run all the Windows updates as well, because some of those will have more important system drivers that you need. So don't leave those out. They can cause problems. But for now, this worker is as far as we can get it. So I'm going to close out of this and head over to the storage server. Okay, so now I am on the PC that I call the storage server 1. And you can share a folder from any one of these PCs, but what you really want to make sure you do is share a folder that's on a bigger hard drive or a system of hard drives. The one I'm using here is called Compute Drive, and it's called the R drive. This is about 8 terabytes total. So if your files are large, get multiple terabytes. If they're not generally that massive, you can work on a smaller single hard drive. So in this computer, I have a C drive that runs Windows, and then I have these 4 hard drives that make up the compute drive. But what we need to do on this computer is, just like we did on the worker, we need to enable network discovery, network sharing, all that underneath the network settings. Normally this drive would be blank. I've already created a compute file here is what I call it. What you need to do is you need to come into the hard drive you want to share, create a folder. So just for reference, let's create a folder. So we'll say new folder, name it something unique for this so we know. So just some random numbers there. Highlight this folder, come up to the share tab, which is at the top of the page, and then click on this where it says specific people. And basically this drop down box says, who should I share this folder with? You can put everyone, you can put specific users that the PCs have to sign into, but if you use everyone, it's going to be a lot less work. So add that. So you highlight it in here and then hit add, and it'll come down into this list here, and this shows who has access. Okay, and then just after you do that, click share down here, and this screen will close. Once we've shared this folder, we should be able to go to all of our workers and find this folder. Basically, that'll just allow us to work off of one Blender file like we talked about. Then we can get to some rendering. I already have these in here, so this is one of my fluid simulations. you can see I have the Blender file, the render frames, which is a blank folder. That's where we'll store all of the frames, and then a fluid cache that the simulation needed. So that's under this networking tutorial folder. And the R drive, I've already shared. This compute files drive, I've already shared all these PCs. I'm going to close out of remote desktop. You guys have not remoted in yet, so this is just what your main screen PC would look like on whichever machine you were setting up hard drive. So I'm going to close out of this real quick, and then I'm going to connect to Render 1 again. And we'll cover remote desktop here in just a second, but this is the app I'm using. Now on another PC, so this is not the storage one, and you can see our new 12323 folder that we just made has popped up in here. So we know that the sharing itself is working. So the next question you'll have is, how do I see that drive? Because if you just open this PC, even though we've shared those folders, this one won't see that. So what we need to do, I'm going to disconnect from this to show you. So what we need to do is we need to come in here and select network, right click on that and say map network drive. Pick a letter, and like you saw, I was using R. And then in order to find these, so the network has these folders shared, so all we have to do is start typing the proper name. It's 2 backslashes, and the example below this entry kind of shows you how to do it, but I need to start typing in storage server 1, which is that PC with the hard drive I want to use. And you can hit browse, and these are PCs that have access on here, and you should be able to see the one you want. So highlight the folder you want, hit OK. I always check this, connect using different credentials, hit finish. This will ask you to type in the password of the machine that you're trying to connect to. So this one is R5, which is my storage PC. I click remember credentials and then hit OK. And now you can see we've remapped the network drive. So I have my render files in here, and you're just going to want to repeat the same process. So go to each one of your workers and map the drives. So what that'll do is that'll allow you to share the folders, share the files, so you can work off of the exact same file on all machines. So the next step is to set up the remote desktop app. So I'm going to leave this PC for now. Now this is my main workstation that you're seeing here. When you're ready to render, you'll send one file to your compute drive, which by the way is also mapped on this machine. I have that same R drive saved to my workstation. It's time to render, so you copy those data over into the shared folder so all the other PCs can see it. And you can do the same thing. You could share the folder directly from here to all of the render machines. It's just really up to you on how you want to set it up. It doesn't matter as long as they can all see the same file. In order to remote in so that I don't have to get up and reconnect to different PCs physically, either remote desktop app, which is preferable, or TeamViewer. Definitely search around if you want to on the internet for other ways to do this, but I just like to pin. So if you type in here remote desktop app, actually it's this remote desktop connection is what it's called. I pin that to my taskbar down here, and then when I click on it, it'll pull up this little menu here. The first time you do it, yours will be blank. So this list will store the names of PCs that you've connected to. So you can see all my different drives here. I have basically I have render 1 through 6, and the storage server drive here is in place of 5. But these are all my PCs. So what you'll want to do is, this is the PC name you made earlier. So render 1, render 6, whatever. You want to type that into the top bar, and then you got to hit show options, and it'll bring up this extra bit of entry here. So you'll type in the username, which is the Windows sign-in that you made for that machine. So computer is the PC name, so render 1, username is R1, password for this machine is R1 as well, with computer name, username filled in, password filled in, and then check the save data or save password button. Then hit connect, and this should load right into your machine that you're trying to control. So render 1 is the one we had just remapped the drive to. So now you can see here's that high-speed splash blender file. And if I go, if I leave here, so we'll disconnect here, and we'll go right into let's just say render 2. Looks very similar, but this is the same exact process. So if I click into these compute files and then tutorial, here you go. You've got the same file. So at this point, you should have all the software set up so that you can see the same Blender file and all the resources for the file from each PC. So the next step is going to be setting up all of these PCs to start rendering. Okay, so the first thing you need is to create a file, and again, this is on the shared drive. Create a file folder, an empty one where the frames will save to. All of the PCs will dump the newly made frames into that same folder. If you don't set it up this way, you have to manually tell Blender which frames each PC should render, and that is super inefficient. So set it up on the shared drive. Let's go back to render 1, but we'll do the exact same thing. I like to go in order so I remember which ones I've already started. So let's go to render 1, and then we'll open our blend file. So now we're finally getting to the big exciting part, which is the rendering itself. Okay, so the reason we went through all of this hoopla to get the same Blender file is all of the assets, all of the textures, baking information. You can see I have the fluid simulation baked up here. All of that can be packaged to come with the file, and all of the settings that you had in the original one before you copy it to the shared drive, all of those settings will still be in here. So any change you need to make to rendering, like if you want to bump up the render resolution before you start all these machines, just make a change and then save the file. And if you save the file, all of the PCs will have the exact same version of that file. So if you start a render, you realize that a texture is missing or whatever, you can stop the machines, come in here, make the change you need, save the file, and then just reopen it on all the other PCs, and you're good to go. So it's super convenient. One thing to always check is, go to Edit and Preferences in Blender and check on your Cycles render devices if you're using Cycles. So for this one, 3060 Ti is going to do great on optics, so I'm going to leave that checked. When you save this file, the preferences are going to be separate for every iteration that you open. So if a different PC has a different graphics card, so you'll still have the correct stuff on that PC. So these don't save across all devices. They're automatically kind of pulled in for each one. But it's always good to come up here and check to make sure like you're not on CUDA if you have an NVIDIA GPU, because optics is just faster, for instance. So it's good to check it. So that's step 1. And then the only other settings we need now are update any other render settings as needed, but then for under your Output Properties tab. So we've got all of our stuff set up. Go to Output Properties. Under Output down here, you want to pick a folder where all of the frames will save, and this is important. These have to be in the same spot between all machines. If they're not, each PC will just render all of the frames, and you're just wasting a bunch of power basically if you do that. So you can click in here. We'll go back to our empty render frames folder and hit accept. So now when we start the render on each one of these machines, they'll start to dump frames in there. So there's 2 more settings we have to change. Just down below there, by image sequence here, there's an overwrite box and a placeholders box. You have to uncheck overwrite, because what that does is each PC will say, okay, I'm going to start frame 3. If it sees another frame 3 has been started, it'll delete that one and start it again. So basically, you'll just have the same 3 or 4 frames running over and over again. So that's not going to help us. And then you want to check on placeholders. So what a placeholder does is right when a machine starts to render a frame, it puts an empty, basically an empty file size like PNG or whatever in the folder for the frames, so that all of the other PCs know not to render that one. So when I start this machine, it's going to start on frame 1 because it's the first one running. The next machine might start frame 2 and so on. If you don't have this placeholders checkbox turned on, they're going to start whatever frame is available and they might overlap. So basically, if you do that, you're going to have a lot of overlap, kind of like you do with the overwrite setting. So overwrite off, placeholders on, and at this point, as long as you've got everything else in your file configured the way you want, this thing is ready to go. So I'm just going to quickly show starting a few of these machines, and then I'll show you on my workstation what the folder looks like so you can tell that it's working. So I'm going to come up here and go render animation. Take it just a couple seconds to start loading frames. So you can see here the render screen popped up. So at this point, I just hit this little X on my remote desktop. You don't want to close anything in here because your render will stop. So just close the remote session. And now I can go right into the next worker. Again here, different machine, maybe different hardware, preferences, system. This one's also a 3060 Ti and the same processor, but I just came in to make sure it's still set on optics, and that's fine. The reason I'm not using these processors is they're very slow compared to the GPUs, but they do have a lot of RAM. I do have 64 gigs of system RAM on each one. So if I really need all that extra render power or bigger scenes than these cards, these GPUs can handle, I will run the Intel CPUs on a separate CUDA render. So you can actually open this Blender file on this machine 2 times and have the GPU render on one frame. So you'd select like this, like it looks here, optics, just the GPU. Then you'd open a second copy of Blender. And actually, let's just do that. We might as well. So you can come back into the file and right click and say open, and it'll just open a brand new fresh iteration. And on this one, let's say I want to run, let's do optics and deselect the GPU because we're not going to run it on 2 separate iterations. But now you can run the processor on one. So if I close out of this, we can run the render here with the CPU only. And then if you look here, we still have both files open. So I can click back over here and start the GPU render. So this would allow one node to be really multiple render nodes. And if your processors have more RAM and you don't have enough on the GPU, you can configure these with separate Blender iterations. So that's another thing I don't think people realize, but it's kind of a cool little trick. So I'm going to close the second one that I had open. I don't need to save that. I didn't make changes that I want. So I'm back here in the original one, 3060 Ti is turned on. We'll close that. We're ready to start. So I'm going to hit render animation. Notice all the settings over here on the right side are the same because we opened the same shared file. Go to render animation, and you know it's working already because if you look at the frame it started with, it started on frame 9. So as you know, when you start rendering, it'll start on the first frame. If you don't tell it otherwise, well, up through 8 already had a placeholder or was done. So this machine picked right up on number 9. So just like we did on the first one, this is going. I'm going to leave it alone, disconnect, and I can just keep going on to each PC and basically get them running. So just to show you that it's working, the compute file on my workstation as well. And here you can see I have the exact same Blender file. But like for right now, say I wanted to keep working, and I am because I'm recording this video, so I'm not going to render while I'm doing this. It's really nice that the other machines can start rendering. You know, you can do really low sample count renders to just get an idea of what it might look like really fast while you keep working. Um, you can let them run entire projects and continue doing a new project on your workstation. It gives you a lot of flexibility to basically not hold up any part of your process. But so just to prove this is all working, I'm going to go in here and open the render frames folder, and you can see in here I only started 2 of the workers. So we have 2 of these PNGs, frame 14 and well now 15 and 16, have a file size of 0 because they're just placeholders while they're being worked on. But we've run 1 through 15 already. So I can close this, I can start working on something else, and these frames are already just scooting right along. So this is the big point. All of these frames, you guys probably know what to do with it after, but you can drag the image sequence into a video editing software, and it'll make a video from it. Um, if you've got to this point, you probably already know that. That'll about do it for all the technical stuff. The one takeaway from all of this, I guess, is it's really nice to get to a point where you, as the artist, or whatever you're doing with your PC, when you are the bottleneck and not your hardware, you literally just have basically free reign to do what it is you want. So if you're not waiting on a computer, um, that's really ideal for content creation, in my opinion. But hope this was helpful, guys. I know it's long. It's a lot of info. But I hope the chapters I set up are helpful and you can kind of skip around to what you need to know. If you have anything else you want more details about, or completely different topics, maybe you want to see what my workstation is, and whatever, just let me know in the comments. I love to talk to you guys, and I want to learn, and I want to help you guys learn. So just go down there and start typing away, and we'll get in touch. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.